Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Romina Ichon. This is a moment that all of our listeners have been waiting for all year, the PRI All-Stars Winners and Losers Year-End Wrap-Up. We've got our usual crew, Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications, Lance Azumi, Senior Director of Education, Carrie Jackson, Fellow in California Studies, Ben Smithwick, our VP of Development, and our newest All-Star, Evan Harris, Manager of Media Relations and Outreach. So sit down with your favorite drink and enjoy. Welcome back, All-Stars. So we're going to start off strong with the category of Biggest Winner for 2019. Carrie?
I'm going to go with Donald Trump. He seems to be protected as much by Teflon as Ronald Reagan ever was. The media and the Democrats, they probably thought by now they would have removed him from office since they started the impeachment almost literally the day after the election, or plans for it. But he just seems to get stronger as time goes on. So I'm going to give him the award for Biggest Winner 2019.
How about you, Evan?
You know, I went pretty corporate with this one, but I chose Disney and Bob Iger. They just launched Disney Plus. They had a movie earn $2 billion this year. That might be a solid answer, but I just think Disney is ending the year on top.
How about you, Ben?
So my biggest winner for 2019 was actually also my biggest winner in 2016, and that was Brexit. So I'm sort of having deja vu here a little bit today. As we all know, Boris Johnson campaigned successfully to withdraw the UK from the EU, and now he has an 80-seat majority in Parliament to finish the job. And I think, in my opinion, it's manifestly the biggest news story of 2019. And while the path forward for Brexit is a little bit unclear still, I think the latest election bodes well for those who value freedom and free markets, not only in the UK, but also in continental Europe as well.
Lance?
And, anyone who knows me knows that I'm an Anglophile and that Ben and I always think alike, or mostly anyway. And so I actually also had Boris Johnson as the biggest winner for 2019. Not only does he have an 80-seat majority, but it's the biggest win for the Conservative Party since the Margaret Thatcher years in the 1987 election. And, I really think that this is a victory not just for Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. It is a victory for the British people, for those who believe in sovereignty and in freedom, and that chafe under the rule of nameless and faceless bureaucrats in Brussels.
Tim?
Well, I'm going to go with California Governor Gavin Newsom, who hogged the spotlight without regard with what you think of what he did. He hogged the spotlight from legislators and seemingly made a media splash every day with some new initiative or another. But if you look at it, he racked up arguably one of the most successful first years of a California governorship in recent memory. And as free marketeers and those who will be paying for the higher spending and inevitable higher taxes to come, that's probably not a good thing.
So my biggest winner is me. What can I say? I have great colleagues, a wonderful family, great friends, and my parents were brilliant and brave enough to emigrate to the U.S. and settle here in California. What more can I ask? So our next category is Biggest Loser of 2019. Carrie?
People on the other side, all the politicians and media characters who swore that Trump was a Russian stooge, couldn't stop talking about it, and even now still are talking about it.
Evan?
Channeling my inner Sally here, but I picked Medicare for All. And shameless plug, we also have a new aggregate poll at pacificresearch.com that you can check out. But Medicare for All, it was polling highly. It was featured in all the early debates and all the candidates proposed, and it's really just kind of fallen flat, and it's become too complicated. People don't understand it. They're getting the terms confused. So I think heading into 2020, it could just continue to divide folks.
How about you, Ben?
So my biggest loser for 2019 is actually the media. About 1 in 4 U.S. newspapers this year had layoffs. Most recently, I don't know if the people sitting around this table read that Vox Media, the big media conglomerate, actually had to lay off hundreds of employees in California as a result of AB 5, the new work requirements in the state. And I think at a time when there's been an uptick in distrust of the media and increasing accusations of bias, I don't think it bodes well for the general media landscape in general. So I think journalism in general in the U.S. is struggling to find its way in this new era.
Lance?
Well, my biggest loser of 2019 is kind of the flip side of my biggest winner. The biggest loser is actually the British Labour Party. And if you look at the defeat of the Labour Party, it wasn't just a numerical defeat for them. It was where they lost their seats. The big red wall in northeast England just came tumbling down. And the Tory party won not only its usual seats in the relatively prosperous South and Southeast, but also won seats, across the northern tier of England, seats that, were in many cases decades or even 100 years or more in the hands of the Labour Party. And so I think that it shows that the old alliances of people with the Labour Party are being destroyed. And I think it also is a harbinger of things that may come in the 2020 election here in the United States that will build upon what happened in 2016 when President Trump was able to win the Rust Belt Midwestern states in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and those states. So, I think it's going to be a very interesting 2020.
Tim?
Well, my biggest loser is Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, who proved that a huge GOP advantage in Kentucky are not enough to save your political career when you alienate virtually every ally and potential supporter, and you spend your entire time poking your friends in the eye.
My biggest losers, and agreeing with Ben here, are independent contractors in California. So the Democratic legislature passed and Newsom signed into law AB 5, which puts new restrictions on who can be an independent contractor. The bill is primarily aimed at unionizing gig economy workers like Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, but now it's affecting so many people, from freelance journalists, as Ben says, and software engineers. So, once again, Sacramento is out of touch with Californians, and sadly, this bill will chase away some of the most productive workers out of the state. The best policy idea of 2019. Carrie?
I'm going to go with California's Fair Pay to Play Act, and that lets college student athletes make money off of their names, likenesses, and images without losing their amateur status. I think this was a rare, good piece of legislation from California in recent years, and I'd like to see it spread across the country, which it looks like it's going to do.
How about you, Evan?
I agree with Carrie. I think this really, one of the few things that was brought out of California that was really good was it started the conversation about compensating college athletes. And you saw in late October, the NCAA is really going to change that model, and by 2021, they're going to allow college athletes to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. In California, they always like to say they're first in the nation, and usually we cringe at some of the proposals, but I think this was one of the good ones to come out of the state this year.
How about you, Ben?
My best policy idea is actually a policy from another state, and building off of the Supreme Court's 2018 Janus decision on public sector union dues, Alaska's governor, Mike Dunleavy, signed an executive order earlier this year requiring public sector union members to actually have to opt in to union membership before agencies can actually take dues from worker paychecks. And what's interesting here is that Alaska is a pretty heavily unionized state, but the governor feels that this is pretty important to protecting worker freedom in Alaska. And the rule is currently being challenged by union officials, and it's working its way through the courts. But I think if the governor is successful, it will be interesting to see how other states react and other more conservative states react to this type of decision.
Lance?
Well, my best policy idea of 2019 is President Trump's Education Freedom Scholarships that will expand educational choice options for kids. It's not a new federal program, but is actually funded through a voluntary taxpayer contributions to scholarship granting organizations for which they get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit. It's a great proposal, substantively help lots of kids who really need that, and it's also a smart proposal politically because school choice just generally polls extremely well all across the board, but especially in low-income and minority areas.
Tim?
Well, my best policy idea of 2019 was found right here at PRI in our Wayne Weingarten's Breaking Down Barriers to Opportunity series. And in that series, Wayne has shown that the best way to lift people out of poverty and help people climb up the economic ladder is by embracing policies that fuel entrepreneurship. And if only lawmakers in California and other states listen to some of the ideas for reforms that Wayne puts forward in his series, I think we'd have a lot more wealth in a lot more communities.
Well, I'm also going to give it to the home team here, to Wayne Weingarten as well, on his research on drug pricing. Drug pricing is so very complicated and has very little transparency, and I think it's why so many Americans believe that they are paying too much, and it's all the fault of the drug companies. And so kudos to Wayne for helping to educate politicians, the public, the media on a pretty complicated issue. Worst policy idea of 2019. Carrie?
California's Assembly Bill 5. It's an effort from where I see it to outlaw freelance and contract work, and it's going about its business do well. It's a gift to unions, but I think it's going to be the biggest job killer of all time.
How about you, Evan?
I agree with Carrie. I think no surprise here. It's got to be AB5 in California. As Ben mentioned, just the recent Vox layoffs. The truckers are having a hard time. They had filed a lawsuit. They're another big group fighting it. And I think 2020 there will be a ballot initiative that gig economy companies are pursuing. I would say of the year the worst bill, and potentially many, many years down the road.
How about you, Ben?
Well, state legislators in California on the last day of the 2019 session passed Senate Bill 1, also known as SB 1, which, as PRI's Evan Harris, sitting next to me today, wrote and explained in a recent blog post, was really an attempt to push back against some of the federal environmental policies coming out of the Trump administration. And one of the things it would have done is allow state regulators to use scientific baselines and biological opinions that were in place before President Trump took office. And so obviously it would be really outdated stuff anyway. And there's been a lot of debate about whether those opinions are scientifically valid. And the bill was actually vetoed by Governor Newsom, and it would have had devastating impacts, particularly with respect to water allocation for farmers in the Central Valley. And although it was vetoed, it's probably not the last bill of its type that we'll see before the end of 2020, I would guess.
Lance?
My worst policy idea for 2019 for me is hands down AB 1505, which was signed into law by Governor Newsom, who Tim says is the big winner here in California. Well, he might. Gavin Newsom might be the big winner politically in California, but the big loser in California is courtesy of his signature on that bill, which will destroy charter schools in this state. It will eliminate the expansion of charter schools. It gives local school boards, which are often controlled by the teachers' unions, a whole list of new reasons to deny charters, and it'll make it basically impossible for charters in many districts to get a foothold. So, it's going to be a catastrophe both for the charter movement and for children.
Remember when Donald Trump said we would get tired of winning under his administration? Well, I think Lance and I and many others are already tired of Gavin Newsom winning so much. My worst policy idea of 2019, and I'm going to stay at home for this one too, and it's the proposal by some in Congress to roll back the state and local tax deduction cap that was part of President Trump's tax reform law in 2017. As our Wayne Weingarten showed in his research this year, the state and local tax deduction cap has provided tax fairness for those who live in low-tax states and who actually were subsidizing higher taxes and higher spending in states like California, in New York. And actually putting that cap in place in the first place is finally starting to wake people up about how much we're really paying in taxes in California.
That makes 3 of us for AB5. Best politician of 2019. Carrie?
Still waiting on that person to emerge. Can't say.
How about you, Evan?
I know Tim will like this, but I picked the great Mitch McConnell. He was on Time's most influential list. I believe he's on record to break the number of judicial appointments that was set under Obama in about half the time. I think Obama did it in his full 8 years. An article I came across, McConnell's going to do it potentially in 4. So, he's really this quiet bulldog in the Senate that I think by design you forget he's there, and he's just incredibly effective, incredibly efficient, and a great politician.
How about you, Ben?
So I actually went local with my answers for best politician, and the next question is going to be for worst. And I actually chose Bakersfield Mayor Karen Gau as my best politician, and I really can't think of a local politician who is a bigger champion for their city and for their constituents. Mayor Gau has a pretty consistent presence at public events and ribbon cuttings, and although the position is more honorary than some other mayorships, she's been a vocal advocate for improving the quality of life for residents in Bakersfield and has brought to the forefront key issues like homelessness and improving the quality of life downtown. So I vote her as my best politician for 2019.
Lance?
Well, my best politician for 2019 is Governor Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida, who was elected by an extremely narrow margin, but is now one of the most popular governors in the country. He has a 70% approval rating, and part of that is because of his expansive view of school choice. He's signed into law several bills now that would expand school choice. One, for example, to increase the number of kids eligible and funding for the Gardner scholarships, which are education scholarship accounts, savings accounts for special needs children. So he's got, right now, in addition to his general rating, he has upwards of 70% approval rating from African American and Hispanics in Florida. And in fact, his even Education Week grudgingly called him the unexpected education governor.
Tim?
Well, I'm tempted to change my answer to Cocaine Mitch after Evan's answer, but I'm going to stick with Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who went from nowhere a year ago to being a top presidential contender simply by being a nice, regular guy.
I'm going to go with Joe Biden because he still he's still the front runner for the Democrats. Despite all of his gaffes and his son's shenanigans, he's still the front runner. So he must be doing something right, although I can't really put my finger on it, perhaps because of his opponents are so much weaker. So the worst politician for 2019. Kerry?
Easily Jeremy Corbyn. He's not a U.S. politician. It's hard to argue that any Western politician could have done worse than he did. He almost single-handedly wrecked his Labor Party, which, from my standpoint, would be a good thing to see the Labor Party wrecked. But I'm going to give him also another award this side of this list. I'm going to have to name him one of the worst people in the world.
How about you, Evan?
I went with our home state junior senator, Kamala Harris. I don't know if that's a fair tack on her policies or her as a senator, but I think the optimism when she started her presidential bid, people would have thought she would have been in the top three. She would have been heading into 2020, near the top, if not at the top. And really just after the first debate, the way she fell, how quickly she fell and just couldn't get on her feet. And it just seemed like it literally was a misstep, one after the other. I think, unfortunately, that just puts her 2019. It's just a pretty bad year. From the high ground she had just stepping in was just a low floor to get to.
How about you, Ben?
So my worst politician, also keeping with the local theme, was Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh, who resigned this year after it was revealed that she received hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments from organizations that the city was doing business with that were technically quote-unquote book sales for a self-published book that she had released. And it's really an example of corruption in its purest form, and I was not sorry to see her go.
Lance?
Well, my worst politician for 2019, and I promise this is the last British reference that I'm going to make in this podcast, but it's got to be Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, he is the worst politician on a titanic scale. He has almost single-handedly destroyed the Labour Party. The Labour Party has the fewest number of seats it's had since the middle of the 1930s. He has pulled the party so far to the left and gone into really horrendous directions, such as anti-Semitism, that the great middle of the British public can't even picture themselves supporting the Labour Party. And it's going to take years, I think, for that party to recover. And it's because of Corbyn and the Corbynistas.
Tim?
Well, I agree with Evan. Kamala Harris. I mean, what an epic burn that she suffered. I mean, she took a very promising, very impressive campaign launch here in Oakland that won rave reviews nationally. She took a turn for a moment as the Democratic frontrunner after her debate performance, and she just crashed and burned before even one vote was cast, mainly because she couldn't really answer a question about her policies. And also, all the gossipy stories about the campaign infighting. When that's all you read about your campaign, you're not doing well.
I went with Kamala Harris, too. And unlike my colleagues and so many others, I was never fooled by her. And even after the first debate, I know some people thought she came out well, but I didn't. And I was proven right. Thank you. The most underreported story of 2019. Kerry?
Hunter Biden, Ukraine. This fellow had been a son of a Republican or a cousin of a Republican or somehow connected to a Republican. The coverage would have been just completely nonstop. Yet we get nothing. A lot of silence. What's going on there? We need to know.
How about you, Evan?
This one's a little, I feel like, out of left field, but way back in March, a photo went around showing the first image of a black hole. And I just thought, I like astronomy, I like to read about it, and just the fact that we had never seen a picture of it, and the fact that this came out and they used over 100 telescopes over a year to build it. It was a cool story, did get a lot of coverage, but I think, like any media cycle, it disappeared very quickly, and I just thought that's a very impressive feat that we've been able to take a picture of something like that.
How about you, Ben?
You're right. I don't think it received enough coverage as it should have at the time.
It went into a black hole.
It went into a black hole, so to speak. Mine is sort of similar along those lines. No one wants to use a toilet that uses so little water that it needs to be flushed so many times. And even President Trump recently commented on this, that no one wants to have to flush multiple times just to get the job done. And now there's actually a push to look at the EPA's WaterSense program, which is it's not a mandate. It's a voluntary labeling initiative meant to really help consumers with purchasing products. But now they're studying whether to reevaluate the standards that were set back in the early 90s for not only for toilets but for faucets and shower heads and urinals, things like that. In some states, I think the issue is some states already have standards that require toilets and those types of things to use less water than are required as part of these standards. So it might be an uphill battle for the push to add more water, but that's an underreported story and it affects all of our lives.
Lance?
Well, my most underreported story of 2019 is kind of connected to the worst politician pick of Tim Anaya, because he focused on Matt Bevin, the governor of Kentucky, being the worst politician in America. Well, actually, there was a little bit of a flip side to that, because there was so much focus on Matt Bevin's race for governor that the news completely ignored the fact that the Republicans won every state constitutional seat under the governor's seat. And that included Daniel Cameron, who will be the first Republican Attorney General in 70 years and the first African-American Attorney General in Kentucky history. And he is a real rising star. He's in his 30s, and the president has pointed him out by name, saying that he's a person to watch. And interestingly, Matt Bevin losing that race for the governorship may actually clear the field and not have a poisoned well for somebody like Daniel Cameron in the future. And you might see Phoenix rising out of the bluegrass in Kentucky.
Tim?
And further proof that Matt Bevin was the worst politician of the year with that record and the rest of the races. My pick is the destructive force that will be AB5. Yes, it has gotten a lot of coverage, but I think you could be writing exposés every day about how painful this will be for people who want to be their own boss or work their own schedule or simply have the freedom to create the next big California innovation. It is one of the most destructive bills ever enacted that will have a huge impact on our economy, not just as it takes effect January 1st, but for years to come. The mass attention that it's gotten, it's not nearly enough.
My pick for the most underreported story of 2019 was the Harvard case, where Asian Americans sued Harvard on their discriminatory admissions policies. Asians lost the case, and the court held that Harvard's admissions policies were fair. The reason that more Asians didn't get into Harvard is because they don't have quite the personality. Now, if anyone ever met our own Lance Izumi, they'll know that Asians have awesome personalities. Most overreported story of 2019. Carrie?
Russian collusion and Trump being going back to being a Russian agent.
How about you, Evan?
I went with the market downturn. I think with the U.S.-China tariffs, with every time Trump tweeted, the Fed, every time the Fed gave a speech and Trump would be mad at him, we're waiting for the market to collapse. We're waiting for everything to plummet. It's going to happen now. And I think that's common in every year, but especially this year. And it really just never happened. And the Dow, like the numbers show, the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ are all very high from the beginning of 2019. So this kind of fear-mongering about the market's going to recess and the inverted yield curve, which I guess uninverted itself, it just hasn't been there. And I think you'll continue to see it, whether it's leaning on the housing market or the next indicator. But the economy's strong as ever. Unemployment's low, so it's great for the country.
How about you, Ben?
My most overreported story in 2019 is we see the media focusing more and more on the high cost of college tuition. And it's a legitimate issue. It's a legitimate issue in California in particular. But I think the media is so laser focused on it as a means to promote some of these proposals for free college that are being touted by candidates for president and candidates and current sitting members of Congress. And I think that there are legitimate ways to address the issue, but free college and loosening standards for admission into college are not the right way forward. And I think that's been one of the most overreported stories of the year.
Lance?
I'm going to go with impeachment. I mean, it's 24/7 based upon the thinnest of evidentiary bases. And so, yes, impeachment, as a charge, as a process is important, obviously. But given the lack of actual factual evidence to back up what those who are supporting it in Congress pushing, it just seems to me that it has just been totally overreported by a very compliant media, which, is one of the reasons why I think both large parts of Congress and the media are held in such low esteem.
Trump, 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 Russia, 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 Ukraine, 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 impeachment, impeachment, impeachment.
Well, I'm so tired of this story that the person I have in mind, I'm not even going to say her name because I don't want to advance the story further. The initials GT, and it's not a car. Enough already. Impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. Carrie?
The mainstream media just needs to come out, be honest, and come out and tell us they are the House organs for the Democratic Party. I've had enough of their trying to act like they're objective. It's clearly not the case.
How about you, Evan?
Tom Steyer. I think enough said.
How about you, Ben?
The status quo on homelessness in California. I don't know if you recently read, but San Francisco lost a major Oracle conference. They pulled out of the city, and it's just enough already with the status quo. We need to rethink our homelessness policies.
Lance?
Teacher strikes. All these strikes that are going on from coast to coast, especially here in California, that are promoting a horrible agenda, not related to wages and benefits, but in many cases anti-charter school resolutions and legislation. So it's got to be these strikes.
Tim?
The media fawning over Andrew Yang and his one-trick pony policy agenda of universal basic income. They treat him as if he's a serious presidential contender. He's not. Enough already.
Bummis rep. Carrie?
I'm going to go back to Trump on this one. They've been trying to get rid of this fellow, as I said, since the day after the 2016 election. I'm sure they started plans maybe even that evening when they knew that Hillary Clinton wasn't going to win. And they act like the Republic is on the edge of collapse because of Trump. But when you look around, you see the economy is good, the job market is terrific, the poverty rate is falling. Despite this, he's treated as if he's destroying the country.
How about you, Evan?
I had to go back to find this, but it was the fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. I forgot it happened this year, but I think it was definitely sad to see, and the firefighters were lauded for saving a lot of it, but something, big piece of history for culture and Europe in general, so hopefully it gets fixed quickly.
How about you, Ben?
I thought the bummis rap of 2019 was the new Clint Eastwood movie, Richard Jewell. There's been a lot of pushback from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about the reporter who originally broke the story, just as a bit of background, on that Mr. Jewell was a suspect in the case, but I think anyone who's familiar with the story and who sees the movie will recognize that really was not a major part of the film, and that there are important lessons that you can take away from the film about trial by media, and it's only gotten worse in the social media age, and I think it's a good film. I would recommend it for holiday viewing.
Lance?
Trump and the Ukraine. I mean, really. I mean, when the president of the Ukraine and the Ukrainian officials say that there was no quid pro quo, that there was nothing being traded, and the Ukrainians ended up getting all that they wanted in the end, it's the bummest rap that President Trump has ever had.
Tim?
My bummus rap is that Nikki Haley said in an interview for her new book that the Confederate flag meant duty, honor, and service. That was completely false. Her interview was taken out of context thanks to a smear social media campaign pushed by the hacks at Media Matters, which too many lazy political reporters bought into on Twitter and advanced.
I don't like this category because I could never think of anything. But in the end, I managed to come up with something. So my bummus wrap is the sun-dried tomato pesto chicken wrap at United Airlines. It's $10, and despite all of its fancy ingredients, it really doesn't have much flavor. So I don't recommend it, and it's a real bummer of a wrap. Ferris wrap. Carrie?
Beto O'Rourke being told by voters to go home.
How about you, Evan?
I chose the former CEO of WeWork because he pretty much set up a company, it's Adam Newman, he set up the company to go public. Once they started looking at, I believe it's called the S2, and deciding the price to go public, they realized he was paying himself, he had trademarked the WeWork or We Company, and they were paying him for the rights. Just a lot of questionable things. So he did get fired, but he did get a nice severance, but I think that was fair to see him go.
How about you, Ben?
My fairest rap for 2019 was Prince Andrew, Duke of York. And regardless of what actually happened with respect to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, he really didn't do Prince Andrew didn't do himself any favors in the recent interview he did on the subject. And it's really a shame. I don't know what Lance thinks about that, but he's our expert.
I promised that I would not do any more British references after Jeremy Corbyn. So my fairest rap is actually for the creators of California's ethnic studies curriculum. It was so far to the left and included, actually failed to include any real mention of anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, that even the liberal California legislature pushed back on that curriculum, and the creators actually had to go back to the drawing board. And so finally, we got something that was so crazy that even lawmakers in California thought it was too far.
Tim?
Mine goes to Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, who's the author of the aforementioned AB 5, and she's been harshly attacked on Twitter by independent journalists from across the country who write stories for California publications as freelance writers, and now, thanks to AB 5, they won't be able to submit more than 35 articles a year. And as Ben mentioned, Vox just announced they're laying off all of their independent writers who live in California. The criticism of these writers on Twitter toward Gonzalez was savage, biting, and true.
My fairest rap as a USC alum is going to all of those parents who got caught in Operation Varsity Blues. 15 minutes of fame. Carrie?
I'm going to give that to Greta Thunberg. She'll still be famous in 2020 and probably beyond that. But I'm going to give her the award because I think she should not have been famous for 15 seconds, let alone 15 minutes.
How about you, Evan?
I had the wife in the Peloton bike commercial. I
like that commercial.
I didn't even notice it till I guess it was the uproar. She was like in another ad for Ryan Reynolds as Jin. So she kind of turned it into something to make fun of, but it definitely had legs and took off on its own.
How about you, Ben?
My 15 minutes of fame is actually Tom Steyer from San Francisco. I think he's really tried and tried to put his best foot forward, but I think he'll fizzle overall after the primaries are over.
Lance?
My 15 Minutes of Fame award goes to Katie Hill, the Democratic congresswoman who was caught in various compromising positions with various members of her staff. And, she came into office, trumpeting all her social justice and woke credentials and ended up getting hoisted up by her own petards.
Tim?
Mine goes to Marianne Williamson, John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, and all of the other also-rans of the 2020 presidential campaign.
Mine goes to our own Ben Smithwick. Ben put our Right by the Bay blog on the map. His blog was sourced by Liz Wheeler in her new book, Turning Point. All right, Ben. So next category, sorry to see you go. And I'm sorry to see Marianne Williamson go. She was quite entertaining. Carrie?
David Koch of the Kansas Kochs, or the famous Koch brothers. I never met him, but he put his money, and he was worth about $50 billion net worth, to good use, funding causes for expanding liberty.
How about you, Evan?
At first, I thought Ro was saying you were in the sorry to see you go. I was like, wait, what? Okay. It's been a fun ride. Bye, Ben. I put the retail industry, which is very random, but I just came across this article, and it was, I think, close to 10,000 retail stores have closed. So I guess I'm not complaining because I'm an Amazon Prime fan as much as the next person, but big impacts there. So.
How about you, Ben?
I was sorry this year to see Cokie Roberts go. She was a good reporter, mostly fair, I think fair for the most part, and is a good example for journalists today who seem more interested in gotcha questions, sound bites, and going viral on social media.
Lance?
Well, I was sorry to see Jerry Brown go as governor of California. I didn't agree with Jerry Brown on lots of things, but he would have vetoed AB 1505 and the other anti-charter school legislation and a lot of these other bills that the biggest winner in 2019 signed.
Tim?
Well, I have two choices. The first is one near and dear to my stomach, and that's Biba Caggiano, who is a legendary restaurateur who put Sacramento on the restaurant map and fed many a political leader in the capital city. Her famous lasagna that melts like butter in your mouth. And the second is billionaire and former presidential candidate H. Ross Perot, who ran perhaps the most entertaining presidential campaign in history and put such phrases as deep voodoo and giant sucking sound in our political lexicon.
Destined for stardom in 2020. Well, I'm intrigued by Boris Johnson, UK's new prime minister. We'll see what happens with Brexit, but he's definitely one to watch in 2020. Carrie?
This is going to be more wishful thinking than a prediction, but I'm going to go with a named Nikki Haley, who was South Carolina governor, Trump's ambassador to the UN. I think she could use 2020, if she wanted to set herself up for a good 2024 presidential run.
How about you, Evan?
I took a little easy out on this one, but I put whoever the star of the Republican and Democrat National Convention will be in 2020. There's usually someone who gets acclaimed for being a rising star or gives a keynote that no one was expecting. So something to be on the lookout for in each convention next year.
And maybe someone from PRI. We never know.
Yeah.
It could happen.
You know who that could be.
Yeah. So my destined for stardom, I continue to be intrigued by Greta Thunberg, who was previously mentioned in another comment. And some people might think that her 15 minutes of fame are up, but I really think that her star is just rising. And you guys might laugh, but I predicted that Trump would be elected, and I think her star is rising.
Lance?
Well, I think the rising star, or the person destined for stardom in 2020, is actually Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader of the House of Representatives, who will become the next Speaker of the House, I'm convinced, after the 2020 election.
Tim?
Well, as a Kevin McCarthy alum, I like that answer. Mine is something you probably didn't even think of, but it will become a star in your homes, and that's the remote control, which will be needed to change the channel away from the incessant, annoying, round-the-clock coverage of the 2020 presidential race.
Destined for oblivion. Carrie?
I think this is, again, a little more wishful thinking. I hope it's going to be Tom Steyer. His constant, I know what's best hectoring is just annoying. You don't have to watch more than one commercial to be tired of it, read one story to be tired of it. And I may get my wish, because his polling is really low. He's at barely breaking 1%. So, maybe it'll come true. Maybe he is destined for oblivion in 2020.
How about you, Evan?
I chose our favorite senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. I don't think 2020 has any year ever been his year, but 2020 will be his year. And I just think after this, he had the health scare, and I just wonder if his kind of time in public service is coming to an end. He's been around a while, and I think after this, it's kind of like, what do you do? So.
How about you, Ben?
My choice was Duncan Hunter. He was a promising politician who really could have gone on to do bigger and better things, but instead became caught up in everything that the public hates about politics and corruption. It's really a shame.
Lance?
Well, my destined for oblivion is actually the flip side of Kevin McCarthy, is the House Democratic majority. They have spent an irrational amount of time on a process that is polling horrendously for them, and yet they still, like the captain of the Titanic, are ready to ignore the iceberg right in front of them, and they're going to hit it square on, and it's going to sink their ship.
Tim?
Well, mine is Uncle Joe Biden, who will see a sad, perhaps pathetic ending to a legendary political career. But the big question, which I'm not predicting, is whether he will face the end of his political career in the Democratic primary or in the general election.
I don't know, Tim. We'll see what happens this time next year. So my destined for oblivion in 2020 is the previous decade. I think that a lot of political, social, and economic problems came to a head this past decade, and government has shown that it's too broken to even attempt to fix these problems. I mean, we'll see how history will judge the last decade, but I'm glad it's over, and I'm hoping for a better decade to come. Free Marketeer of the Year. Carrie?
I'm going to have to go with my friend Larry Reed. He retired from his job as president of the Foundation for Economic Education earlier this year. But he's been a force for freemen and free markets for 5 decades, and I think he deserves more recognition than he gets.
How about you, Evan?
I feel a little silly saying this one, but I was actually looking for industries, and the meatless industry has really hit steam. Beyond Meat filed for an IPO this year. At one point was worth $4 billion.
I lost a lot of money. I bought it.
And McDonald's, Burger King, a lot of chains. I believe even Tyson is looking at meatless chicken, which sounds terrifying. I think if you would have said this, is this a category in industry, 5 years ago it would have been no. So the fact that it's come out of nowhere and, it's profitable and people are embracing that trend is interesting. I won't be supporting it, probably ever, but good luck if you like to eat that.
How about you, Ben?
So I promise I'm not a suck-up, and I don't know if I used this, if I had this answer last year, but I actually picked PRI's president and CEO, Sally Pipes.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, just quickly, in addition to all of her media work and research and op-eds and all of that, she's been particularly engaged this side with engaging with the other side of the aisle and participating in debates at UC Berkeley. She had a big debate in New York City earlier this year, and she's really been a fearless advocate for empowering doctors and patients rather than the federal government.
Lance?
Well, Ben and I think alike. I'm giving my Free Marketer of the Year to our president, Sally Pipes, as well. In addition to all what Ben said, I think it's not just the folks here at PRI who recognize the incredible work that Sally's done for the free market movement, but other important organizations have recognized that as well. Sally recently received an honorary doctorate from the Pepperdine University School of Public Policy, recognizing her work in healthcare reform. And so I think that it really cannot go wrong with Sally Pipes as our free marketeer.
Tim?
Well, mine is a tie between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi, who defied the odds to reach agreement on the USMCA trade agreement, which will provide a boost to the U.S. economy and help workers in several industries, including agriculture and auto manufacturing.
My free marketeer of the year goes to our colleague, Damon Dunn. He grew up in abject poverty, but he was a talented student, a strong athlete, and worked hard and got into Stanford, played in the NFL briefly, and is now a successful businessman. But even better, and this is why I say he's a free marketeer of the year, he's taken his past experience. He's working with PRI to help educate young people on why free markets work, and why socialism and universal basic income and some of these trendy things that are going on in our current culture, how only free markets can deliver prosperity and success. And we're looking forward to publishing his book next year. New Year's resolution. Now, my New Year's resolution is to write more, and I think Tim will be happy with that. If we're going to try to help reverse some of the really terrible things happening in the state, we need all hands on deck, and so I pledge to write more for the blog. Carrie?
Same as last year. I don't do New Year's resolutions, never have, and I won't be starting in 2020. I'm sorry, 2020. Or 2002 for that matter.
How about you, Evan?
This might help, Tim. We'll see. Mine was to read more, but I think, in our work we read a lot, and I realize I haven't read many fiction or fun books, so I'm looking to try to read more books with not any time I have.
How about you, Ben?
Mine is actually a personal one, and it's to eat less chocolate. There are some. Listen, guys. Listen. I think that there are some health benefits to eating it in moderation, but I think I could certainly cut back on my chocolate intake.
Lance?
Well, my New Year's resolution is to actually focus more on homeschooling, which I believe is the coming education wave of the future, and actually is the ultimate way for parents to really take ultimate control of their children's education.
Tim?
Well, mine will make all of my fans on the internet happy, but mine is to make and post more Instagram stories in 2020.
Okay, predictions. The first one, who will be the Democratic nominee for president, and who will be the next president of the United States? I'm going to go with the safe route. I'm going to go with Biden, and I'm going to go with President Trump. Carrie?
Elizabeth Warren. Donald Trump.
How about you, Evan?
I'll echo Ro on the first one, and I think it's a safe route because it's the reality. Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, and I think we will see term 2 for President Trump.
How about you, Ben?
I think Biden will be the nominee and the president.
Lance?
Well, I think that Biden will be the nominee, which shows the weakness of the Democratic field, because Biden is an extremely weak candidate to me. And I believe that President Trump will not only win, but mark my words, he will win in a landslide.
Tim?
Well, I'm going to go with a surprise choice for the beginning, one that it's at the tip of your tongues, but you're not thinking about. I say Hillary Clinton is going to be the Democratic nominee for president. She's chomping at the bit to run, and as this Democratic field is, no one's putting it away, I predict you'll see a Hillary announcement sometime in the early part of the year. But I do think, given that, his favorite foil will be nominated against him, President Trump will be reelected.
Even though he locks kids in cages and
Yes.
trades favors.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Special thanks to the All-Stars Tim Anaya, Evan Harris, Lance Zumi, Kerry Jackson, and Ben Smithwick. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening and happy holidays from PRI.